Great. Okay. Hi, welcome. My name is Jem Jelly. It's Jalal, but Jelly is easier to pronounce for most people. Welcome to my talk today. This is when your agile transformation fails, what will you do? Just a very quick intro about me. I facilitated my first daily Scrum in 2006, accidentally, may I add. I've worked with over 150 teams using agile frameworks, so Scrum, Kanban, XP, or just like Agile as an idea. Scrum is more of my expertise though. I've trained over 4,000 students in Scrum and Agile, and my USP is really a combination of those two things, the real world application of Agile, practical ideas for the inevitable, the imperfect situations. So let's talk about what it means when I relay the message of failure in a transformation. Why do I start from this point? If I could invite you to think about this term, first of all, you may have heard this before. We're looking to create a well-oiled machine. That's sometimes a manager, could be a CEO, could be a director. It's well intended, but they're asking an agile coach, a scrum master, or any kind of change agent to create this well-oiled machine. Could be the team, department, or the organization. And whenever I've heard this phrase, it makes me think of someone who believes that a team or a department or an organization is something which you can kind of assemble, like this mechanical thing, and it's linear, it's predictable. And I can understand why that's attractive to some people, right? You bring in an expert with the certification, with the answers or the recipes, and they can assemble and put together this organization, this transformation, with enough planning and enough analysis. It's starting to sound like a different type of approach, isn't it, that we know about? And the great thing is if this machine breaks, the expert is able to put on their reductionist lenses and get to the root cause of the problem and figure it out. I would rather see transformation at the team, department, or organizational level as something which I feel that mimics more of an organization, which is a city or a town. You can probably just see from the difference between the two pictures. This is, as I say, this kind of like very clear, structured entity with this more messy, colorful picture. It feels immediate for me, this kind of like the symbolism between the two, just seeing the pictures. And a city is a complex adaptive system, which is a very snazzy way of saying it is not something that you can figure out through a plan. It is not linear. It is not predictable. It is something whereby there are patterns we can use. There are ideas we can inject in, but we only really know what's going to work once we've experienced it. This is why empiricism is very useful when we're dealing with a complex type of work or a little work in a complex space. If I could offer you the analogy of your team at work being like a house, and your house is part of a street, and many streets form neighborhoods. So that could be like a department. And your department or this neighborhood, a collection of these neighborhoods could form a borough. And many boroughs form a city and so on. Now, when you think about how change works within a city, you have MPs and councillors who have a lot of decision-making power. And what we try to do as citizens of our city or citizens of our organization is raise issues and try to get the support and the buy-in of such people to help us with changes and transformation. So how often do your MPs and your councillors come through for you, both in your borough and in your workplace? I can tell you that there was a situation where I live in North London on the street within the area that I live, and there were many cars appearing which had a similar kind of like an auction badge. And it turned out there was a gentleman who was using the street as a place to sell cars. Now, it's not illegal to have more than one car, but it is illegal to treat the street like it is a place where you're going to use it for commercial purposes. Now, what do you think happened when one team, my house, we raised an issue with the council to talk about the problem. How responsive were the council? How much urgency did they give to the issue? Not very much. I'm sure you're not surprised. But when the problem started to affect more than one house and many houses on our street, or many teams within our department, we could say, there was a petition. Many of us went along to these council MP kind of surgeries where you can voice your concerns or complaints. Some people went to the civic centre, some people wrote a letter, and many hands made light work. And through the voice of the many, we got to a point where the council took action, excuse me, and the person was warned to move their cars or they would be removed. And so what I'm trying to show here is that if change is more like a living, breathing organism, like a city, as opposed to a machine, how does change actually work? And it's not as predictable and as clean and as simple as we want it to be. And why was it that my first request for the cars to be removed or for somebody to give my issue some urgency was ignored? Why was that? Is it because the council didn't care about my needs? How about when you've raised an issue as a team or an individual as a department with a director or a head of, or someone on the board? Is it because what you need is not important? I don't think it's because people don't see our individual needs or our team needs as important, but you can imagine for the council, they've got a number of competing needs. They have a finite amount of money and infrastructure and time and workforce. And so they have to really prioritize where they're going to focus their attention. And just like in a transformation, we have managers and directors and people who make big decisions that have to make difficult decisions. Okay, there are always competing needs. There are organizations that want to, move from an architecture which is not a big monolith that allows teams to be more autonomous. However, at the same time, that organization needs to deliver upon the commitments they have for existing clients, and that means using the existing, technological enterprise. Or you have an organization that wants to create space for teams to kind of cross-learn and reduce key person risk and get intrinsic motivators out. And at the same time, they have got aggressive deliverables, and it's hard for them to make that space. So I'm not talking about what's wrong or what's right. What I'm trying to relay here is that it's an imperfect system and there are competing needs, and it's very difficult for the decision makers to do things, really well. Not to mention the human side of things, whereby managers involved in a transformation may know or understand intellectually what behaviors are required, to relinquish control and give teams some space and let them have an opportunity to fail and learn. But they're having a hard time kind of shifting that paradigm and making that happen. Not to mention that there may be peers who don't really buy into the idea of working in an empowered type of way for certain scenarios. And that status quo vibe begins to affect the way that they want to work. So it's not because people don't understand things intellectually, but because there are, genuine personal challenges that they have to overcome. There are competing needs. And we are, as I say, in an imperfect situation as coaches when we're trying to guide these transformations. So where do we come to? We often come into this kind of perfect storm situation where these elements, or these factors, if you like, they all come together and they can really impede or affect the effectiveness, of the efficacy of any kind of transformation effort. Let's start with the first one. It's a leadership problem. If and when you kick off a transformation and you have people that fall back into their old ways of working for all of the reasons we mentioned about competing needs or their own paradigm challenges they've got to overcome, or maybe they've not been equipped with the skill and the knowledge to do certain things in these new ways of working. It's great talking about beyond budgeting or sticky budgets, but that manager who's now stepped into the role, who's worked in that same role for 10 years to now, guide the transformation, they may not know how to communicate that idea to the board. They may not know how to make that happen with annual funding. They may not know how to do that with stakeholders who have worked in a certain way. I just want to give you a deeper example. And when the transformation aspirations are not, carried out in terms of the behavior of the leadership team, you start hearing teams get cynical. It's understandable from one respect. They're like, they're not taking it seriously. We're back to the command and control. We've got the big design up front stuff going on. It's just pure dependency management. We've not broken things down to make teams a bit more autonomous and to decouple things, so on. And then we start mistaking everything for a leadership problem. And we think that leadership becomes this role as opposed to a trait. And then people stop trying. And when they stop trying, that's a really, that's an important factor into a transformation working. People from the bottom up still being interested and engaged. Let's just be practical. This is when we see, managers like the idea of something, but for whatever reason, the pressure, the status quo, their reflexes, it causes them to, say, let's be practical or pragmatic, which can be shorthand for, can we go back to the old ways of working because it's more comfortable? Okay. We now have they're not serious anyway, and it's still part of that kind of, it's a leadership problem type of tone from the people doing the work at the coalface. So it's not just about the leadership part being, a trait versus it being a role. This is around where people really lose hope. And again, it feeds into this lack of engagement. So people are kind of plodding along, and you've got a bit of a zombie workforce trying to do the agile things by name, but they've stopped trying. They've stopped serving up data. They've stopped having difficult conversations. They've stopped trying to compel because there's a little bit of it's not quite worth it. And the final element here is I don't feel safe. So waiting for the same organization that is supporting the status quo to make you feel safe, to have your voice feel heard. It could be, I don't know if you use things like town halls, which is a bit more old school, but some companies still have it. You don't feel safe to voice your opinion and ask those difficult questions. You don't feel safe at the lunch and learn, or you're not able to try and say, hold management accountable to the things that they said they were going to do versus the things that are actually happening. When these four elements come together, or these factors, in my experience across, several transformations, it really becomes difficult, and it feels like you're moving through treacle, because both the top down and the bottom up, you have pockets of people trying, but on the whole, there's a certain type of, the weather is very kind of foggy and grey, and that transformation effort has really lost its impetus. It's the age-old question, isn't it? How does transformation work? How does change work? Does it work top down or bottom up? And it is a trick question. It needs to happen both ways. And so we were speaking about the metaphor of an organization being like a city. I wonder how change has worked in cities. We see so many case studies from large consultancies, and I appreciate it's not exactly the same when I talk about a city or a town, but they are complex adaptive systems. Cities are containers for social systems. And there is many things, there are many things that we can consider and observe about how change or transformative change works in such, complex adaptive systems. I'll come back to this. And so I asked this question: how does significant change really work? Civil rights movement, women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, the Equality Act, all of these movements, if you think about it, the existing status quo, I'm sure there were managers and leaders that were trying to support these changes, but there is also a status quo that may see these things as inconvenient, okay? I'm not talking about the morality of it for some people, but it's more like, I'm here to do a job. I just want to go with the flow. It's not really affecting me. And it's too much effort and disruption to try and make these, revolutionary things happen. Now, if you look at any of these radical changes in society, if you just take it as an analogy, it's not exactly perfect. Analogies aren't meant to be, but they all had something in common. The people from the bottom up were creating this type of push to hold the leaders that wanted to make the change accountable. There was this activism whereby people would find their voice collectively to try and stimulate change. As I say, the same status quo is not going to gift you the space and the opportunity for a change which could be seen as, inconvenient to them. So there is a bit of a kind of XP mantra of, you take action and ask for forgiveness. And also, activism is not shorthand for violence. I'm talking about useful activism. I'm talking about bringing together the people in a way whereby you have the empiricism. You're able to talk about the impact of not doing certain things in a meaningful way, where you remind and refresh and influence people in positions of power so they can remember why the transformation was important. And I use the word push, and that can seem a little bit taboo when we're talking about coaching. And when I think about coaching or being a change agent or a scrum master, I think for these roles to succeed, we need to be dynamic. And we have our directive and the non-directive or indirect approach to coaching. And we have to know when to be, as I say, direct. And this is the pushing part of it. This diagram here is showing you some form of hierarchy or a network, if you like. And what I've circled here are the managers. And the managers are the people who we look to in a transformation, that we want to equip with the knowledge and the skill, who we want to lead by example, just like the citizens. But they have, more decision-making power than most. I live in London, and although I can act on my own volition, I can find my own voice, I don't have the same power as the Mayor of London, okay? So if we're able to influence the Mayor of London, that can be really important in terms of how he structures certain parts of, policies that affect societies in the same ways in workplaces. So what about the push? Well, the circles that go underneath the red circles or the orange squiggly lines are the teams trying to push back onto managers. And joining as a coach, I have found priming teams and myself to expect failure, to expect people to fall back into their old ways of working, is actually good for resilience. Because if we walk in there thinking that we're going to get it right from the first part, we often talk about inspecting and adapting experience, we do, but we sometimes forget about the expecting and adapting on the behavioral part for people. It takes time for people to get these things right. The creating the management accountability part, literally pushing back and asking harder questions. We see agile values all over the walls of companies. We see blogs, we see all types of, media talking about how they embody this human-centric way of working, but sometimes they don't really embody it. And how you create that accountability, that can be done in a number of ways. But I'm talking about really calling forward people to be resilient. And part of resilience is being able to speak up and find your voice and challenge people. Empiricism, this was mentioned before, it's both objective and subjective. If you've got an organization I worked with and they're talking about improving the attrition level, well, that's a great aspiration. But if we keep swapping around team members every single sprint and it keeps annoying the people because they can't get into their flow, well, your attrition levels are going to suffer. And when you dig deeper, it might mean that the reason you keep shuffling things around is because of the way you structure your company in terms of, projects versus products. And I'm not going to get into that debate here, but what I'm getting at is you're saying one thing and you're doing another, and here's the data to support it. Impactful language. It's great that teams can, bubble up things like burn down or burn ups or cumulative flow diagrams or lead time and cycle time. This is very, very important. But being a good scientist and gathering the data, I don't think is enough. We need to be better journalists. We need to find a way to connect that data in a way whereby it, provides a story so that the audience, whoever they are, can really start to see how or why we need to refresh or rekindle or restart that transformation. Okay, it's no point talking about, test-driven development or continuous improvement or all these types of words or phrases or ideas or practices to people who say come from a Dragon's Den type of vibe. We've got to talk about maybe time to market. Okay, we've got to talk about losing market share. So we've got to be adaptive in that respect. So that's the push part to management. Just as we start to wrap this up. Oh, and here's the pull part. The pull part now is, as you can see, the arrows are facing outwards towards other teams in the community. And what I found is that the way activism works is by leading from example. And we can do that whereby it all starts with one team. And let's say, one team in a multi-team meeting doing a sprint review is able to be open with stakeholders about the challenges that they faced. Because some say Scrum teams can't talk about it because it's a little bit like, oh, we better hide our mistakes. That can send a powerful message out to other teams. And people have conversations in corridors, and they may be talking about, how did you get to do that, and who's supporting you in doing that. Leading by example to help people find their voice and speak truth to power is certainly a start. Okay, and there's many ways that can be showcased. Guilds and chapters. I've been in companies whereby we had a guild, people talking about the organizational problems, and it wasn't just open to the agile coaches or the scrum masters. It was available for anyone and everyone. And when people come along and they talk about these systemic problems, it's no surprise that often these are symptoms of the same problem. And when that happens and people come together, you can really, galvanize each other to go towards to push stuff, get the empiricism together, and to, really start focusing on how we can get managers to be accountable. Now, this ties in nicely with the next point, brave and safe space. So brave space is a concept which is a bit different to a safe space, and I think you need both. But a brave space is about helping people move towards their edges. In other words, not everyone is able to ask those tough questions at the town hall, the lunch and learn, or keep management accountable. They're not able to find their voice and ask those difficult questions and have those, say those unpopular things. And so for some people, they need to maybe start off in a safe space where they can share the information together. 1 minute, sorry about that, where they can share the information together, gain the confidence, and maybe, some people do not want to step out of that safe space and they'd rather bounce ideas and let other people take the lead on it. But what I'm trying to show you is that we want to create an environment where we respect that some people are able to step out of their comfort zone more so than others. And it's okay. We don't want to force bravery. Nothing would be worse. Resetting expectations. This ties in with the priming of the mindset of when we start our transformation. I say to teams, look, this is not about us kicking off a transformation and with enough analysis and experts and certifications, we're going to get it right the first time. We're really not. People are going to fall back into their reflexes. If I can dovetail here, it's something to this kind of tune. Managers are human, to end on this. They can be overwhelmed with needs. Okay, there can be multiple things going on. They may want to manage the status quo. They may want to keep rapport with certain people. They like the idea of the agile things, but put into practice didn't quite work out. They're getting pressure from stakeholders or other types of senior peers. Status quo reflexes. When people fall into pressure, it can happen. Our reflexes appear. Are we coaching them and supporting them when those behaviors pop up? The will, but not the skill. There are many willful and enthusiastic managers that I've met, brilliant people that want to help with a transformation, but have they been equipped with the skill? So not just the book smart stuff or the theory or the certifications, have they got the skill? And if they haven't, have they got the support to know how to bring certain ideas to life in imperfect situations? Interested but comfy. Back to paradigm. People may show you enthusiasm and excitement, but when it comes to it, they'd actually like to sit on their laurels. And we have to think about how we may want to galvanize them, understand their needs, and or maybe help them find a different role. Secret saboteur, this is the wicked problem. We can't, force people to come along, and it's often in the frozen middle we see these things. So someone will show you or say the right things in front of management, but when it comes to it, there may be that kind of passive approach to be a bit of a barrier. But this is, again, about helping your team and even yourself be aware and prime yourself as to you are going to be working with an imperfect situation. People are going to get it wrong. The same way that we're going to be running experiments with process, we need to run experiments with what works with people's behavior. It's not just like a one-off thing whereby you set up the garden and it's going to cultivate itself. It's an ongoing task. It's a labor of love. So to really, drive home this point here is we're saying a city is like an organization. You won't get it right off the bat. People will fall back into their old behaviors because of competing needs and paradigm challenges. And the bottom up can start to lose engagement. And we've got to find a way to keep people connected and engaged and to be able to push and pull to catalyze and promote change, just like we've seen in society with some of the more radical changes. My name is Jem D'jelal. You can check me out on jemjelly.com. I've started creating more content there. I create quite a lot on LinkedIn as well. I have a YouTube series where I provide small clips of my experience over the last 15 years, and it would be great for you to check it out. I hope that was useful. Have a fantastic day, and thank you very much for watching. Okay. Bye-bye.